Today I want to talk to you about some work that I've been trying to sort out the ideas behind for bringing AI into the classroom. I think we've all seen the advent of chat-type models based on transformers, foundation models, etc. They sort of appeared on the scene about 2 years ago now, and most of us, I think, by now have interacted with them in some ways. But they have an amazing potential, in particular, for interactions that involve sort of complex discussions and where people will come in with different levels of knowledge and need to interact with them in very different ways. And unlike a lot of the tech that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, where the interface is largely exactly the same for everybody, these allow a level of customization and a couple of other things that I'll try to show you today that really will change how I think teaching and learning start to occur. They can support educators, they can provide lesson plans, they generate questions and answers. With a little tech, we can automatically grade those things, give feedback to the instructor, and so teachers can have a whole bunch of work that they were doing that they don't need to do anymore, which allows them to concentrate on the things that they're more interested in and what they uniquely can do. They can tell you whether your course has covered all of the topics it's supposed to. You give them the set of lectures and they look at it and say, oh, you were supposed to cover this and it's not in any of your lectures, right? So it's really a nice way to check on those kinds of things. And then the thing I'm going to talk a lot about today is active learning. So we have learned over the last few decades how important active learning is in the classroom. And one of the things that really challenges teachers is the ability to meet students where they are. Not that they can't do it one-on-one, but as soon as you put 40 or 50 students in there with one teacher, there's not a lot of one-on-one, right? And so how does that change things? But even more importantly, these tools will provide students with interfaces and ways to learn that are in some ways independent of the teacher. And it's quite powerful when you realize that this changes the balance of power in the classroom, right? The traditional classroom, the teacher knows everything and the students are there to learn. Suddenly the students have access to other very sort of modifiable tools that they can interact with and understand that help them learn what they don't know and hence probe the teachers more for why is that true, right? Why should this be happening? And that's the sort of thing that I'm going to try to get to a little bit today. These foundation models basically do amazing things. Chat is pretty good. You can discuss topics with them in a conversational manner. They can analyze and integrate some types of data and not other types, but they'll get there. They are pretty good at analyzing images, and in recent sort of releases, they've been able to do integrated pictures and text, and that's getting better. But one of the most important things about them, and the thing that might also be surprising, is they're just machines. And when they're machines, that means we as humans can engineer them. And what you're seeing mostly in the news these days is not transformational changes to the underlying AI, but all of the things that we can layer on top of that. Because the sort of, when they came, they were so different and so, in some sense, primitive. And now we're seeing, oh, here's all of the things that we can do that are based on those. We can customize preferences in ways that you're just not used to, right? You open up your iPhone, you'll have apps. Everybody else in this room will have the same apps, and largely everybody's configured exactly the same way. You can't do the, I'm a 35-year-old engineer and I want my app to behave in a way that it would for a 35-year-old engineer, but that's what you can do with these large language models. You can tell it you want short, direct answers. You can tell them you want long, explanatory answers. You can tell them you want flowery language. You can ask them to do something in compose a sonnet on how to, fix your radiator in your car, and they know how to do that, and then they can translate it into 15 different languages for you, right? You really can make them do what you want, and that's great. You can ask them to adopt a persona. This will become, I think, one of the fundamental pieces that appears in the classroom. You can say, I want you to be a climate skeptic. Here's my essay. Tell me what a climate skeptic would say about this. Or I want you to be a statistician or an epidemiologist and tell me how an epidemiologist would think about this. Or tell me how a chemist would think about this, right? And a single language, large language model with the right kind of engineering can adopt those personas. We can now, and more of them are coming out, create semi-autonomous agents, right? A semi-autonomous agent is essentially a piece of software that runs in a loop and talks to a large language model in the background. You can define any number of them. You can create lots of them. They can do different things. You can say, you're a data scientist, you're a climate expert, you're a fact checker. You can have them all sitting in a dialogue on a Zoom call, analyzing what comes in and providing comments on that as you go along with those different points of view. Right? This is really quite amazing when you think about it. And if you think about it in a classroom setting, properly instrumented, this can really change how students, especially K through 12, I think, will interact with AI. But what goes wrong? And what's so good about them? The good thing about them is I ask it a question, I don't get the same answer all the time. If I did, it would be very boring and we'd all put it down and move on to something else. They're stochastic in nature. They give me similar answers most of the time, but since they're stochastic and they can choose what's the next word in this sentence from any of a large set of words, sometimes they really head off quite far away from what we were hoping they would talk about. They give authoritative answers, sometimes based on absolutely no information. But I suspect every one of you knows somebody who from time to time exhibits a similar behavior. Right? So yes, we like to make fun of them, but if you step back, that's just another normal human personality trait, right? And just like, as somebody pointed out to me today, 5-year-olds that are convinced they know something, you can train them to understand what they do and they don't know. We need to be able to assess the accuracy. We don't want to put these into a classroom setting if the answers aren't at least as good as the teacher's answers would be, right? They will be amazingly counterproductive. And especially at university level, we need them to be accurate beyond what they currently are. But they're pretty good. For example, most doctors today use them in their practice because they know a lot about medicine. Most university professors are starting to use them, both in designing their research, certainly in writing their papers, because their language skills are better than most of ours. And they remember that you put a paragraph at the start and you shouldn't repeat the same ideas at the end of a paper. They catch that in seconds, whereas most of us can't do that. We're just cognitively too impaired. So my proposal here, and for lots of other things, is how do we regulate them? Well, we already have autonomous or semi-autonomous units we stick in the classroom that do things, right? Sometimes they're right, most of the time they're right. Sometimes they interact with our children in ways that doesn't make us very happy, right? We call them teachers, right? These machines aren't behaving very differently, and we probably would do well to start regulating them or think of systems of regulating them in the same way that we regulate teachers. Standardized exams. We need to know what they were trained on and how they were trained so that we can understand what they might do in different settings. We want to require ongoing accreditation among many other things. So as we deploy them and we learn what they don't do well, we want to basically change those exams. But the nice thing is that we can do that. And I think that having professional societies and government involved in those things are ways to both empower teachers to be more engaged in the activities that are going on and how they get employed, but also to help us understand how they work. And as I said, we do that with teachers. But somebody who's a really bad teacher, it can take you years, if not decades, to find out that they're a really bad teacher because the feedback is not that great. With these types of instruments, because they're basically running online, you can require almost instantaneous reporting, especially of adverse events. And so again, somebody has to say, well, what is an adverse event? But you can imagine if we had one of these models being used in classrooms, throughout the state, it wouldn't take us very many weeks to find the places where they weren't doing well. to identify those, and again, force people that were selling these for use in that setting to have guardrails around them so we could turn off some of the capabilities until remediation had taken place, right? So in some ways, they're a little bit safer than other things because we can get feedback so quickly. And because there's so many of them out there and they're all essentially the same, that feedback will help inform us about how well they're working. And I would say that anywhere you're going to put one of these things that's going to mimic a human or do a job that a human would, this is a reasonable strategy to start. You can put them out, you can put guardrails around them, and you can start to regulate them. And in fact, there was not very long ago a paper from some folks at Harvard Business School urging the FDA to think about exactly this sort of system to allow these models to be used in sort of medical decision making. Regulate them the same way that we do doctors, basically keep track of everything they do and use them as aids to overcome the somewhat very large and growing deficit of good medical care here for education. So Ethan Mollick and his wife wrote a number of papers very early on in this around what can you do in the classroom? How do you put these kinds of machines into the classroom? What can they do? And they identified a set of 7 interactions that they thought would be somewhat useful. Being a mentor, being a tutor, being a coach, being a teammate, being a student. One of the things you can do, especially in sort of upper years, is have students teach one of these machines how to do something, right? If you know how to do it, you can teach it. Really opens up the opportunities, it can simulate things, and it can be a tool. It can help them put in references. It can help them do, all kinds of things. I want to look at one experiment out there that was basically done that said, how do these work in the classroom? And they came up with AI tutoring outperforms active learning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is and what the advantage is. And just to orient people who haven't been in education very deeply, active learning, one of the examples that's widely used is this notion of a flipped classroom. So we used to, when I was a student, you go and sit and the teacher would tell you a whole bunch of things, and then you go home and you try to put that into practice. And nowadays in a flipped classroom, you're given an online video to watch, you're given some material to read, but when you come to the classroom, you're not there for the lecture. You're there to start working on the problems and to do group work with other people. And so that facilitates this active learning. The stuff that you can do on your own, you don't need to be in a classroom to watch a lecture, right? You don't need to be in a classroom to read some notes, but you do need to be in a classroom to have your peers around you and to do group work and to ask the teacher questions. And so if we flip that, that's called active learning. There are 7 reasonably well accepted components of active learning, and I have them here. The first 5 are in green. That's because more or less they are activities that a good teacher does today, does very well, and they're largely independent of class size and of who's in the class. There's almost nothing in these first 5 that is affected by having 50 students versus 100 students, right? And there's nothing that's really affected by you're in a school where, everybody is, sort of gifted versus a school that has a wide range of students with very different backgrounds. Those 2 are different experiences for the teacher. The last 2, right? So these 5 are independent. These last 2 are the ones where the active learning breaks down in the classroom. You have one teacher, you can give them a couple of helpers, you still only have 3 people in there. It's very hard to deliver feedback and information in a targeted and timely fashion to the students in that room. And it's very hard to allow for self-pacing. Some of the students want harder problems. Some of the students want easier problems. Some of the students don't know how to do this particular thing. And there you are stuck in an active learning thing without enough resource. And these kinds of tools can be trained and deployed to allow students to ask for harder problems, to ask for, hey, I'm trying to do this and I don't understand it. And the times that it can answer their questions and get the student going are the times that the teacher doesn't need to do that and they can spend time with other students. And this is really the reason that I think these will transform teaching and learning. We have lots of online courses. People can take big online courses and learn machine learning or learn any topic you want. But sadly, the lectures that you see and the assignments that you get in those are all exactly the same. So the only way that it's self-paced is that I can take it on Monday or I can take it on Wednesday. It's not self-paced in that I already know this part and I want to know more about that part, right? These kinds of tools make it that kind of self-paced, right? I can go deeper where I want, I can jump over what I want, right? But I have more control over my learning experience by using these kinds of tools. And there's nothing special about being young and doing that, right? Learning lifelong learning experiences, things like understanding Medicare and Medicaid law and forms, right? These things are actually remarkably good at filling out forms. There's companies out there today that are formed using these to fill out forms for people. You can do it yourself with their help. Diversity, another challenge in the classroom. We know from lots of experience, both in the classroom and in industry, having diverse points of view discussed on lots of topics. And I'm not just talking about social economic status or ethnicity or background. I'm saying, I'm sitting in a room in biotech and somebody's telling me about, well, I'm going to make a small molecule that does this, and I'd like to have an expert opinion that comes in and says, here's what you should do for a large molecule, right? It's diversity of skills. It's diversity of all kinds of things. And we're getting to the point, people are doing nice experiments, again, we're not there yet, but we can see them coming, where we can design chatbots with human-like diversity. This gives us the ability in situations where we don't naturally get that for whatever reason to be able to bring it in when we want to. We end up in this very nice cycle. I think somebody had a cycle that wasn't the virtuous cycle, and this one is the virtuous cycle. We do deploy, assess, improve, right? We end up in these things where we try it out, we see what doesn't work, we change it, we try it out, we see what doesn't work. So my call to action is essentially, we know or believe, I hope I've convinced you a little bit, that these can lead to a very rich learning experience. And we need to overcome our resistance to doing that and to get involved in helping to push them into places where they can do things with a lot of guardrails so that we are aware of what they're doing. And as I said, one of the good ways to do that, I think, is to have regulation and reporting requirements so that they can be deployed. We know that they're working reasonably well and we're checking on them very regularly. And then, hopefully, they will change that teaching and learning experience. And not doing this is also somewhat problematic because, in case you didn't know, pretty much everybody above grade 3 is using these tools all the time now. They're just too pervasive, and as I said, they're just too good, right? They really have transformed the way that we already do a lot of writing. It's really shocking how quickly they are. And it's a good thing because it changes the sort of ability of people to express themselves. It lets you concentrate on the things that you want to concentrate on and gives you some help on the things that you don't. Thank you very much.